To preface this film, let's go all the way back. Exactly 10 years ago, we got 2014's Godzilla, which was the start of the MonsterVerse, and I genuinely loved that film. Now, granted, I have really only watched it back in 2014, that one time that I experienced it, and from what I remembered, I truly loved that film. The sense of scope and scale of the Godzilla was phenomenally done. The human story actually worked. The characters were sympathetic, endearing even. And then they created the MonsterVerse as a continuation after that, 3 years later with Kong Skull Island, which I don't hate that film. It's very fun and very colorful. I just thought that that film was kind of all over the place. It wanted to be a comedy, but then it also wanted to be an action. And personally, I didn't really care at all for the editing process of Kong Skull Island. Plus, that was kind of the start of the sense of scope and scale kind of diminishing, but not too badly. And then, in 2019, we got Godzilla King of the Monsters, and I'm gonna admit it right now, King of the Monsters is the worst film in the MonsterVerse universe. Not only does it just not make any sense at all, you can't even fucking follow it because the movie is just unfollowable and unwatchable. The cinematography is garbage. Everything is so grainy and dirty to the point where you literally just can't see it. You can't experience what's going on, especially in the up-close action experiences in King of the Monsters. And that was also the film that really started to lose the sense of scale of the MonsterVerse. They would try to implement these cinematic experiences where it was the camera panned out and you saw the fight just in one shot scope, and that's fine. Usually I like that in little, small, tiny stories, not so much in a monster film. That film's scale kind of made the monsters look like a thumb in every scene. And like I said, when you're actually up close in that film, it was so grainy and dirty, you couldn't really follow it. The editing and everything was just so choppily done, it was a mess. It was a horrible mess of a film. And then in 2021, we got Godzilla v. Kong, where it all came together. And it was Godzilla versing against King Kong. And there was also a surprise in that, in Mechagodzilla being the villain over it all. And what I said in my review for Godzilla v. Kong was that if it were 2 hours of non-stop frenetic action, which usually is the opposite of what I want in a film, but in Godzilla v. Kong, it would have worked and made perfect sense doing that. They didn't do that at fucking all. What they did in Godzilla v. Kong was they gave us maybe 30 minutes of action and then an hour, 15 minutes of a human story that was so boring and just dumb. I didn't care for it. Ultimately, I gave Godzilla v. Kong a 5 out of 10. It wasn't good. It wasn't bad. Now, 2024, 3 years later, and again, the 10-year anniversary of the start of the MonsterVerse, we get Godzilla x Kong, the New Empire. And I'm probably going to have some spoilers for this film because the things I want to point out are basically spoilers for the film. So here we go. Godzilla x Kong, the New Empire is kind of an amalgamation of all of the MonsterVerse films put into one, and that's not good, not bad. So the biggest thing, the good I can say about this film, hands down, much like Godzilla v. Kong, is Godzilla x Kong. The VFX and the action sequences are actually phenomenally, superbly well done. If this were a 2-hour film of non-stop these action sequences, this could have been a 9 or a 10 out of 10. But it wasn't that at all. For some reason, since Godzilla v. Kong, I believe the director's name was Adam Wingard, and writers felt the need to incorporate more human story inside of Godzilla x Kong, more than they did in Godzilla v. Kong, which I'm not the only one. Nobody likes the human stories. These are monster films, and yet they're centered around the humans. Now, Godzilla X Kong at least tries to have some more mythos and lore with the monsters in the sense of the human story. And one thing I liked about the storytelling of this was they kind of pulled a Game of Thrones on Godzilla X Kong's storytelling, in the sense of about 30 minutes into this film, every character's story is tossed around, and one storyline is Godzilla, one storyline is the human story, and another storyline is King Kong, and it all kind of combines by the end of the film. And I did like that aspect of the story, the storytelling. What I didn't like about the story was basically everything else. Even the things in the story for the characters that they wanted so badly for you to like, I didn't really like at all. Like, prime example, the villain in this film ends up being Scar King, which is another gorilla, and I guess the story of Scar King is more of like a humanized, sympathetic type of story, where he feels trapped in Hollow Earth and he wants to make it into Earth, I guess just to be his own king in his own kingdom. And that's good and fine and all, except the way that they wrote Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire, is that I didn't give a flying fuck about this villain. Honestly, I cared more about Mechagodzilla in V Kong than I fucking did in Scar King. And why? It's because they literally only had one throwaway scene for the lore and history of Scar King. Otherwise, they just proceeded with the human story. Now granted, that little inner story of Scar King's history was in the human story. And okay, that's fine. I liked that portion of the human story. I was hoping to get more mythos, more experience with Scar King. Maybe have a fourth character being followed so that we actually understand Scar King. Because honestly, this film is kind of set up the way that the Planet of the Apes prequel trilogy is set up, where the main focus are the apes, and you also have the humans, and everybody has their own adventure. But in Godzilla X Kong, it's like they tried to do that, and then the writers just make it as bare bones generic of a story and the writing as possible, and it just doesn't work at all. Like, you don't really care about anybody, especially when the human actors, above all, they're not characters, they're caricatures. And what I mean by that is most scenes that the characters, the human characters are in, they're kind of just throwaway stereotype funny guy or serious woman or little serious girl trying to find some place that's home, but by the end, all along, this was my home. And that's fine and good and all, but that's one note throughout the entire film for every character. Yeah, there are funny moments in this film from characters, and that's fine. Such as, what was his name? Trapper. See, I honest to God can't even remember these fucking characters' names to save my life even. But Trapper, basically every time he's on scene, there's a cue for an 80s song to play, kind of like reminiscent of Thor Love and Thunder, only actually done correctly, where Thor Love and Thunder played one Guns N' Roses song, and every section was a different section of that one Guns N' Roses song. At least in this film, every time they would play an 80s song to kind of mash it up to be like a more fun sequence, at least it was a different song. I will give them credit for that, but at the end of the day, for that as well as Trapper's character, it all felt tonally inconsistent. Trapper became a one-note character, much like everybody else. He, alongside the other guy, were basically just comedic reliefs, more so the other guy, in my opinion. They were both stupid comedic reliefs. And then the girls in the film were basically just there to make the film more melodramatic, but ultimately every actor and actress in this film, they I would say they did what they could, but it ultimately just ended up being super melodramatic, funny, but ultimately boring through the entirety of the film. Set aside the action sequences, which, like I said, the action sequences were very well done. Honestly, though, I would categorize this film's action sequences as Godzilla King of the Monsters, but clear and coherent, because most action sequences in this film derives from monsters fighting monsters, and that's basically what King of the Monsters was. Whereas in Godzilla v Kong, it was that when an action sequence would play out, or it would be those two against Mechagodzilla, where in the New Empire, you actually see a bunch of different species of monsters being fought with against Godzilla or King Kong, you know, like other gorillas fighting King Kong, like the intro or the midway point of this film. And so they did have a lot more variety in this film as far as monsters than they did in Godzilla v Kong, and that's where I would definitely say this film scores one more point above v Kong. But ultimately, Godzilla v Kong and Godzilla x Kong are essentially the same. They both have the same setup in the story, where you get the two, you go through the story, mainly through the human portion, and then the film waits until the very end where you have a maybe 15-minute fight scene with the actual villain of the film. And this film is set up exactly like Godzilla v Kong. So overall, for me, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, the really good positives I have, the VFX, they look phenomenal, they're very well done, and the action sequences are edited very well, and you can coherently watch through this film, and everything is watchable. But I would say the lowest of this film are kind of even lower than Godzilla v Kong, because it seems like they've tried to veer more into the human side of the story, even more so than v Kong, and that's where this film ultimately loses me. So overall, for me, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, I would have to give the same score as v Kong, a 5 out of 10. It's not good, it's not bad. You can sit there and watch it and glorify the visuals, glorify the action sequences, because those are remarkable parts of this film, but everything outside of that is trash. So 5 out of 10, The New Empire. Thank you.